She grew up in a small place where big dreams were usually kept quiet. People there believed in practical work, steady routines, and safe choices. Dreams were fine, they said, but only if they stayed small. From a young age, she learned to nod and smile when others talked about normal paths. Inside, though, something different lived in her. It was not loud or dramatic. It was a steady pull, a feeling that came alive whenever she practiced alone. Away from watching eyes, her talent did not arrive suddenly. It grew slowly, through long evenings and early mornings. While others rested, she repeated the same piece again and again. Sometimes her fingers hurt. Sometimes her mind felt tired. Still, she kept going. She believed that effort had its own kind of voice. Even if no one noticed now, one day they would. She was not chasing praise. She was chasing a feeling of being complete. Her family cared for her, but they did not fully understand. They worried about stability and safety. When she talked about performing on a big stage, they listened politely, then changed the subject. It hurt, but she did not blame them. They came from a world where chances were limited and disappointment was common. She promised herself that even if she failed, she would fail trying. The invitation arrived quietly, like an unexpected knock. A local competition was expanding, opening space for new performers. The event promised exposure, judges from outside the region, and a real audience. When she read the message, her hands trembled. This was more than she had imagined. It felt unreal, like reading someone else's story. She hesitated before telling anyone. Fear crept in with excitement. What if she wasn't ready? What if she embarrassed herself? That voice grew louder at night. But another voice, softer and stronger, reminded her of every hour she had spent practicing alone. She decided to accept. That choice changed everything. The days before the performance passed slowly. Each morning felt heavier than the last. She practiced carefully, not rushing, focusing on control. She knew the piece deeply. Every pause, every shift, every quiet moment was familiar. Still, nerves made her question simple things. She imagined the stage again and again, the lights, the faces, the silence. When the day finally arrived, the venue looked larger than she expected. The building stood tall, clean, and bright, with banners hanging near the entrance. People moved quickly, some confident, some nervous like her. Inside, the air felt different. It carried anticipation, pressure, and ambition. Backstage performers prepared in their own ways. Some talked loudly, trying to hide fear. Others stayed silent, eyes closed, breathing slowly. She found a corner and sat down. Her hands rested in her lap, slightly shaking. She focused on breathing, reminding herself that she belonged there as much as anyone else. Her turn approached faster than she wanted. An assistant called her number. Her heart pounded so loudly, she wondered if others could hear it. As she stood, her legs felt weak, but they moved forward anyway. She told herself she had done this hundreds of times, just not here. The moment she stepped onto the stage, the lights blinded her for a second. She could not clearly see the audience, only shapes and shadows. That almost helped. It made the crowd feel distant, unreal. The judges sat still, faces calm and unreadable. She lowered her eyes and prepared. The first notes came out clean and steady. Relief washed over her. Her body remembered what to do. The piece flowed as it always had. She allowed herself to feel it, not just play it. For a brief moment, she forgot where she was. She was back in her small room, alone, safe. As the performance continued, confidence began to build. Her breathing steadied. Her movements felt natural. The sound filled the space, and she sensed the audience listening. That feeling gave her courage. She leaned into the piece, trusting it to carry her. But beneath that growing calm, tension waited. The stage was unfamiliar. The pressure was real. She adjusted slightly, something she had never needed to do before. It was small, almost invisible. It changed her focus for just a moment. That moment mattered. Her mind flickered with doubt. She tried to push it away, but it lingered like a shadow. She reminded herself to stay present, to trust her preparation. The piece moved forward, and so did she. Unaware that everything was about to shift, the audience remained silent, listening closely. From the outside, nothing seemed wrong yet. From the inside, she felt a strange tightness. It's like walking on a path that suddenly felt narrower. She pressed on, determined to finish strong. She had no idea that this stage, which once felt like a reward, was about to become the place where her confidence would be tested in the most public way possible. This performance was supposed to be her beginning. She believed that with every part of her heart. She did not know yet that beginnings sometimes come wrapped in pain, and that growth often starts with a fall, as the final section approached. She prepared for the most important moment of the piece. She took a breath, unaware that this breath would mark the edge between hope and humiliation. Between the dream she carried and the challenge she was about to face, everything had been going well at first. She felt the music flow, her fingers moved as they had 1,000 times before, and her heart beat in sync with the rhythm. The audience seemed absorbed. The room filled with the sound she had practiced so much. She felt a fleeting sense of triumph. But then, without warning, it happened. A slip. A note she had never missed, a shift she had always executed perfectly, faltered in that precise moment. Her fingers hesitated, her body froze for just a fraction of a second, and the sound faltered. The silence that followed was heavier than she expected. It stretched out, almost physical, pressing down on her chest. She felt her stomach twist, her confidence shattering piece by piece. She glanced up quickly, trying to find support in the audience's faces, but it was worse than she imagined. Some people whispered to each other, their heads turning with a mix of curiosity and amusement. A few stifled laughs escaped, faint but unbearable to her ears. The judges did not smile or nod encouragingly. Their expressions were neutral, unreadable, but she could feel the weight of their judgment. Every eye seemed to measure her failure, every breath of silence amplifying the mistake. She wanted to stop, to run off the stage, to escape the heat and the gaze that seemed to burn into her. But she forced herself to keep moving. The piece demanded it. Her hands, though shaking, continued. She tried to regain control, to find her rhythm again, but the slip had broken something fragile inside her. Fear spread like a cold wave through her chest. She had never felt so exposed, so vulnerable. Her mind raced. Every training session, every practice hour, every quiet moment she had spent perfecting her skill seemed to vanish. The stage, which had felt like a place of achievement, became a trap. Each note she played felt uncertain, her movements stiff. The room, once welcoming with the promise of applause, now felt hostile, judging, unforgiving. She could hear every whisper, every shuffle, every soft laugh. Or maybe it wasn't real, but her mind made it feel real. Tears threatened to spill, but she kept them back. She had always believed that tears were a weakness. She had always believed in pushing forward, in finishing what she started. Now, finishing the piece felt impossible. Yet, she had no choice. The performance was no longer about expressing herself. It was about surviving the moment without completely breaking. She tried to focus on the notes, on the rhythm, on the memory of all the times she had practiced flawlessly. But the fear lingered, gnawing at her confidence. Minutes felt like hours. The slip replayed in her mind with every movement, every sound. She felt the audience's eyes on her, judging, critical, as though waiting for her to fail again. Her body tensed. Her breathing became shallow. She longed for a single person to nod, to smile, to silently encourage her, but no one did. She was alone in that spotlight, the bright lights harsh against her skin, silence pressing in like a wall. She tried to remind herself that mistakes happen to everyone. Even the greatest performers stumbled sometimes. But in that moment, knowledge could not reach her heart. Her own failure felt monumental. The stage, which should have been a place of triumph, felt like a place of shame. Her dreams, which had carried her this far, felt fragile and delicate, as if a single misstep could shatter them completely. Despite the humiliation, she kept moving, each note a struggle against panic. Her hands no longer moved with the same grace. Her eyes sought the end of the piece like a lifeline. The audience's reaction became a blur, an indistinct mass of faces and shadows. She tried to drown out the whispers, the laughter, the imagined judgment. But it all pressed on her relentlessly. The final section approached. She realized that she could either let herself collapse in the middle or keep going, no matter how imperfectly. She drew a deep, shaky breath, trying to focus on the music, on the essence of the piece she had loved for so long. She remembered her countless hours of practice, the times she had played until her fingers ached, the times she had been alone in her room, perfecting every detail. Those memories became her shield. Slowly, painfully, she regained some control. The notes returned, one by one, with more accuracy and confidence. Her body remembered the rhythm, the flow. Even though she could not erase the slip or the sting of humiliation, she found a way to keep moving. Her hands no longer trembled as violently. Her breathing steadied just enough. The audience still watched, but she began to lose herself less in their judgment and more in the music. When the piece finally ended, she held the last note longer than usual, trying to capture something of herself in that sound. The room stayed silent for a moment, as if holding its breath. Then there was polite applause. Not the thunderous applause she had imagined in her dreams, but it was enough to remind her that she had finished. She had survived. She had faced the moment, even if imperfectly. Backstage, she sat down heavily, her body trembling. The adrenaline left her in waves, leaving fatigue, shame, and disbelief in its wake. She buried her face in her hands, trying to hold back tears. The humiliation was raw and deep. She felt every eye in the audience had seen through her, had seen her weakness, had judged her. Every whisper, every laugh, every critical look felt like a wound. She wanted to disappear, to retreat, to hide. But even in that pain, a quiet voice reminded her of something she had forgotten. She had finished the piece. Despite the public failure, she had kept moving. Despite the fear, despite the judgment, she had not quit. That small victory was fragile, almost imperceptible, but it existed. For hours after, she replayed every second in her mind. The slip, the pause, the shaking hands, all of it haunted her. She avoided mirrors, afraid of seeing the person she had become in those moments. She avoided talking to anyone. Compliments would feel empty. Encouragement would feel like pity. She wanted nothing but silence, isolation, and the chance to process the humiliation alone. Her family noticed her mood, but she could not bring herself to explain. Words failed her. How could she describe the crushing weight of being seen falter in front of dozens of people, the sense of exposure and vulnerability, the shame that wrapped around her like a heavy coat? She could not. She could only retreat into herself, replaying the moment again and again. That night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The slip played over and over, each repetition sharper than the last. She imagined every person's reaction, every whisper, every judgment. The humiliation felt endless, unescapable. Sleep came in short bursts, interrupted by memory, by fear, by shame, and yet in that darkness, a small thought emerged. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it existed. She had not quit. She had kept moving, even when every part of her wanted to run. That thought did not erase the humiliation, but it was the first tiny spark that something else was possible. Something beyond embarrassment, beyond failure. Perhaps one day she could find a way to turn this moment into more than just pain. Perhaps one day she could rise. The days after the performance were the hardest she had ever experienced. Every corner of her life seemed touched by the humiliation she had endured on stage. Even simple tasks felt heavier, as if the failure had attached itself to her shadow, following her everywhere she went. She walked through her daily routines with her head slightly lowered, avoiding eye contact, afraid that people might see what she felt inside. Sleep became a battle. At night, her mind replayed every moment, every misstep, every whisper she thought she heard. She felt trapped inside her own thoughts, as though her mind had become a cage where regret and embarrassment lived. She avoided mirrors, fearing the reflection would betray the person she had become, the one who faltered in front of everyone. and had no magic left to hide it. Each time she caught her own eyes in the glass, she saw vulnerability, fear, shame staring back. Friends tried to reach out. They called, sent messages, came by her home. But she found herself withdrawing further. Compliments felt hollow. Sympathy felt like mockery, and even casual conversation seemed impossible. She didn't want to talk about the performance or what had happened on that stage. Words felt dangerous. Explaining it would only make it more real, and she was not ready to face it. Her family noticed the change. They tried to encourage her, reminding her of her talent, telling her everyone makes mistakes, and praising the courage it took to perform. But the words couldn't reach her. The stage had become a symbol of her failure, and their reassurances felt like soft walls she could not climb over. She did not blame them, but she could not feel their support either. Their world and her world were distant from each other now, separated by the weight of what had happened. For the first time in years, she doubted herself completely. Questions filled her mind relentlessly. Was she really good enough? Had she misjudged her abilities? Was all her practice meaningless if a single mistake could destroy everything in front of so many people? Every memory of practice, every late night, every sacrifice seemed suddenly fragile, as if it had been nothing more than a dream that dissolved under the harsh light of reality. She stopped practicing. The piano in her room, once a friend, became a reminder of failure. She sat in front of it, her fingers hovering, but she could not bring herself to play. Each note seemed loaded with judgment. The silence that followed reminded her of the stage, the audience, and the mistake. The music that had once been her escape became a mirror showing everything she feared: weakness, vulnerability, imperfection. Her mind searched for reasons to justify the mistake. Perhaps the stage was too big. Perhaps the audience was too intimidating. Perhaps she had been unlucky. But none of these thoughts comforted her. They only highlighted how powerless she felt. She had never felt so small, so exposed, so unworthy of her own dreams. She began avoiding her friends, the people who had always encouraged her to follow her passion. Their good intentions felt like pressure. She could not hear them say, "You'll do better next time," without thinking of the sting of judgment on that stage. Every attempt to move on, to heal, seemed futile. She felt as though she had been branded by the performance, marked permanently by a single moment of failure. Her self-esteem dwindled. She questioned her decisions, her abilities, and even her worth. Small tasks felt monumental. Every conversation was strained with the fear that someone would judge her, see through her carefully constructed facade. She feared that people would forever remember the night she faltered, that they would define her by a single mistake rather than years of effort, dedication, and talent. She became quiet at school and in public. She stopped raising her hand, stopped volunteering, stopped sharing her thoughts. The fear of judgment extended beyond music into every corner of her life. Each word, each action, seemed measured against an invisible audience that would critique and mock. The stage had taken more than her confidence. It had begun to affect her life in ways she could never have predicted. Her heart ached with isolation. Loneliness wrapped around her like a heavy blanket. She longed for connection but feared the exposure it would bring. Even when surrounded by people, she felt unseen, unheard. She carried the weight of the stage. In her chest, a constant reminder that she was vulnerable, fallible, and human. And every attempt to shake it off seemed to fail, leaving her more exhausted and lost. One evening, she found herself sitting by the window, staring at the dark sky. The stars were distant, cold, and unreachable, much like her own sense of hope. She questioned whether she could ever feel confident again. Should ever perform without fear? Should ever face people without feeling the sting of embarrassment? The questions circled endlessly, offering no answers, only more doubt. She remembered the applause that came at the end, polite and restrained. She tried to hold on to it, but it felt small compared to the weight of her humiliation. The memory of that silence, the harsh, cold, unbroken silence that had followed her mistake, was stronger. It overshadowed the brief acknowledgement of her effort. That silence became a phantom that haunted her, a reminder that the world could be unforgiving and cruel, even when no one meant it to be. Days turned into weeks. She drifted through life in a haze, mechanically completing tasks without joy or energy. The piano sat in the corner, untouched. Friends' calls went unanswered. She avoided public places, fearing that any interaction might remind her of the stage and the failures she could not escape. She felt trapped in a world that had grown smaller, darker, and harsher, a world that seemed designed to remind her of her weakness. And yet, despite the despair, there was a faint, almost imperceptible spark deep inside. It was not loud, not noticeable to anyone else, not even to her most of the time, but it existed. Somewhere beneath the shame, beneath the doubt, beneath the fear, there was a tiny voice whispering that she had not quit. She had finished the performance. She had faced the stage, even if imperfectly. That small fact, almost insignificant in the magnitude of her embarrassment, became the first tiny seed of resilience. She could not act on it yet. She could not tell anyone she still cared, still dreamed, still hoped, but the thought lingered quietly in the back of her mind. Perhaps one day she could rise again. Perhaps one day she could face the stage and her own fears, not with arrogance but with courage. Perhaps the humiliation, as crushing as it was, did not have to define her forever. For now, though, she allowed herself to feel the weight, to acknowledge the pain, to sit with the fear. She knew she had to confront these feelings before she could ever move forward. And even in the darkness, the faint spark reminded her that she was still alive, still capable of growth, still capable of reclaiming what she had lost. That tiny spark, buried beneath layers of doubt and humiliation, would one day become the flame that pushed her to rise again. After weeks of avoiding the piano and shutting herself off, she began to feel a strange restlessness. It was not hope yet, not even courage, but a quiet discontent that refused to let her remain stagnant. Every time she passed the piano in her room, it seemed to call to her a gentle reminder of something she had almost abandoned. She had tried to ignore it, to push it away, but the pull grew stronger each day. She started small, just sitting by the piano, letting her hands hover over the keys without pressing them. The familiar texture of the wood, the coolness of the keys, and the quiet hum of memories brought a mix of fear and comfort. She could feel the past mistakes and humiliation lingering in the corners of her mind. But she also felt something else, possibility. Like the tiniest crack of sunlight through dark clouds. The first day she played again, it was tentative, awkward. Her fingers stumbled over notes she once knew perfectly. The music sounded fragmented, not beautiful, not confident. But she did not stop. She reminded herself that this time, she was not playing for an audience, not for judges, not for anyone else. She was playing for herself. That thought, simple as it was, carried a weight she had not felt in weeks. Each day she practiced a little more. She started to rebuild not just her skill, but her confidence. The piano, which had felt like a source of pain, slowly became a source of healing. She learned to accept mistakes as part of the process. Reminders that perfection was not necessary. That growth came from persistence and patience. This new mindset felt strange, unfamiliar, but liberating. Outside of her practice, she began to notice changes in herself. She walked a little taller, spoke a little clearer, smiled a little more naturally. It was not a sudden transformation. There were still moments of doubt, moments when the memory of the stage and its humiliation pressed in on her chest. But she began to recognize them as moments, not definitions. They were temporary, not permanent, and they did not control her anymore. Her friends noticed too. They commented on her improved mood, her return to conversations, her lighter presence. She did not yet share the depth of her struggle with them. She did not need to. It was enough that she was moving forward. Each interaction became a small victory, a reminder that life went on beyond the stage and its shadows. The more she practiced, the more she remembered why she loved music in the first place. It was not about accolades, applause, or approval. It was about expression, about connection, about feeling alive. Each note became a way to reclaim a piece of herself that she had thought lost. She played with emotion again, with intention, with a sense of ownership she had never felt when performing under pressure. The idea of performing again started to take shape in her mind. It was terrifying. She could still feel the echoes of whispers, the imagined laughter, the sting of judgment. But now, those fears were accompanied by determination. She began to imagine a future where she could step onto the stage not to prove herself to others, but to express herself fully, without fear controlling her movements. She began to set small goals. First, playing in front of a mirror, then in front of a friend she trusted, then perhaps a small gathering. Each time she shared her music, even in these small ways, she learned more about herself, her courage, and her resilience. The victories were incremental, but meaningful. She realized that triumph was not always about a single, flawless performance. It could be built from persistence, from returning to what you love, despite fear. From claiming your voice again, her perspective on failure began to shift. She understood that the slip on stage had not destroyed her talent or her dreams. It had only revealed that she could be human, vulnerable, and still survive. That revelation, once terrifying, became empowering. She started to embrace the idea that mistakes were opportunities to learn, not evidence of inadequacy. With time, she began to feel excitement again. She imagined playing her favorite pieces, feeling the music flow through her body, connecting with the essence of each note. She imagined performing, not for recognition, not for applause, but for the pure joy of expression. That joy, long dormant, started to rekindle, glowing softly at first. Then more brightly with each day of practice, she began to plan her comeback, quietly at first. She researched local recitals, small events, community performances where she could play without the overwhelming pressure of a major audience. She visualized each step, walking onto the stage, sitting at the piano, placing her fingers on the keys, and letting the music carry her. The visualization gave her courage, helping her imagine herself succeeding, not perfectly, but authentically. She also began to reflect on her own resilience. She had endured the humiliation, the self-doubt, the fear. She had survived weeks of isolation and despair, and now she was returning, slowly but steadily, to the world she loved. The journey was not easy, nor would it be, but she could see, for the first time in a long while, that the path forward was open, and that she had the strength to walk it. Her support network, though unaware of the depth of her struggle, became more meaningful. Friends who encouraged her practice, who celebrated small victories, and who simply listened without judgment were invaluable. She realized that asking for support was not weakness, but a necessary step in reclaiming her confidence. Accepting help and encouragement became part of her healing process. Days turned into weeks, and she continued to improve, both in skill and in spirit. The piano, once a source of fear, now felt like a bridge to her future. Each session was a chance to rebuild herself, to reclaim what she had thought lost. The music became a companion, a mentor, and a mirror reflecting her growing courage. One morning, she realized she could play her favorite piece from start to finish without hesitation, without fear, without the shadow of that past humiliation clouding her mind. It was not flawless, but it was real, and that was more important than perfection. The feeling was liberating, almost euphoric. She understood then that triumph was not the absence of mistakes, but the ability to rise and continue despite them. With renewed confidence, she began to consider performing in front of others again. The fear had not vanished, but it had been transformed into determination. She knew that standing on stage would still be a challenge, but now she trusted herself to face it. She had discovered that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act in spite of it. The journey from despair to readiness was neither quick nor simple. Each day brought its own tests, its own doubts, its own moments of fear. But she learned to confront them, to process them, and to use them as fuel. She realized that her past humiliation had taught her resilience, patience, and self-compassion qualities that were far more valuable than any moment of applause. By the time she felt ready to step onto the stage again, she had undergone a quiet transformation. She had faced herself in the mirror, confronted her deepest fears, rebuilt her confidence, and reclaimed her love for music. The stage was no longer a place of judgment, but a place of possibility. She understood that true triumph would come not from perfection but from courage, persistence, and authenticity. And so, as she prepared for her next performance, she carried with her the lessons of the past, the strength she had gained from struggle, and the quiet confidence that she could face whatever came next. The journey was far from over, but she was no longer afraid. She had learned that the power to rise, to reclaim her voice, and to turn fear into strength existed within her all along. The day of her comeback performance arrived quietly, without fanfare or announcement. She did not seek attention, nor did she need it. This time, she was performing for herself, and for the music, not for validation or applause. The small venue was filled with a modest audience, some familiar faces, some strangers. It felt safe enough to test herself, yet real enough to make her heart race with anticipation. Backstage, she felt the familiar flutter of nerves. But this time, the nerves were accompanied by something else: focus, determination, and a sense of readiness she had not felt in months. She reminded herself that she had survived worse moments, that she had rebuilt her confidence, that she had reclaimed her love for music. The slip on the big stage was a memory now, a lesson rather than a punishment. When she walked onto the stage, the lights were softer than the blinding ones before. She could see the faces of the audience clearly, yet their presence felt encouraging rather than threatening. She seated herself at the piano, took a deep breath, and let her fingers touch the keys. In that moment, she felt grounded, present, and alive. The first notes came out smoothly. She allowed herself to feel the music, to let it guide her, rather than force perfection. Each note carried emotion, each pause held meaning, each movement was intentional. She was not playing to impress. She was playing to express, to reconnect with the joy and freedom she had nearly lost. The room responded in silence, attentive, absorbed, letting the music flow around them. As the piece progressed, she noticed a shift within herself. The fear that had haunted her for weeks, months even, was no longer a shadow pressing down. It had transformed into energy, fueling her focus, sharpening her awareness. Mistakes that might have caused panic before were now small, almost invisible, easily integrated into the flow. She realized that imperfection did not ruin the experience it made. It humaned. Her heart raced with excitement and confidence at the same time. She leaned into the music, letting it fill her completely. She no longer thought about the past, the humiliation, or judgment. She thought only about the present, about each note and each movement. The piano became an extension of herself, a voice for feelings too deep for words, a channel for all the resilience and determination she had built. The audience, sensing the authenticity in her performance, responded in kind. They leaned forward, listened closely, absorbed the energy she projected. Some closed their eyes, letting the music touch them. Others watched her hands move across the keys, noticing the grace, the precision, the emotion. Applause would come later, she knew, but for now, connection was enough. As she reached the climax of the piece, she felt a surge of emotion unlike anything she had experienced before. The music swelled, rising with her confidence, rising with her courage. She allowed herself to feel proud, not in a boastful way, but in a quiet, deep satisfaction. She had returned from a place of fear and doubt, had reclaimed her voice, and was expressing herself fully, honestly, and courageously. The final notes lingered, fading slowly, and she let them hang in the air. Savoring the completion, the room remained quiet for a heartbeat longer, as though holding its breath before erupting into applause. This time, the applause was not polite or distant. It was genuine, warm, and appreciative. She felt it not as validation, but as acknowledgement of effort, courage, and truth. Every clap, every smile, every nod of appreciation strengthened her sense of accomplishment. Backstage after the performance, she allowed herself to breathe freely for the first time in months. Her body relaxed, her shoulders dropped, and her heart swelled with quiet pride. She had done it. She had turned what once was humiliation into triumph, not by avoiding fear, but by facing it, embracing it, and letting it guide her growth. She reflected on the journey that had led her here. The slip on the big stage, the months of self-doubt, the isolation, the struggle, all of it had taught her resilience, patience, and self-compassion. She realized that true triumph was not about flawless execution, public praise, or escaping mistakes. It was about the courage to rise, the persistence to continue, and the willingness to reconnect with one's own passion. Even after falling, over the following days she felt a profound change in herself. She walked with more confidence, spoke with more clarity, and carried a quiet sense of assurance in everything she did. Music was no longer a source of fear, but a source of empowerment. She knew that the stage would always hold some level of pressure, but she had learned to channel that pressure. Rather than let it control her, the experience also reshaped how she approached challenges outside of music. She understood that setbacks were not the end, but opportunities for growth. She approached problems with patience and reflection, knowing that persistence, effort, and self-belief were often more important than immediate success. The lessons from the stage extended far beyond the piano. She shared her music again. Gradually, in small gatherings, in recitals, in community events, each time she noticed the change in herself, the calm focus, the connection with the audience, the freedom to express without fear. She realized that the true reward was not applause, but the reclamation of her own voice, the mastery of her own emotions, and the ability to face fear and rise above it. Looking back, she understood that humiliation had been a turning point. It was painful, yes, but it forced her to confront herself, to examine her fears, to rebuild from the inside out. Without that moment, she might never have discovered the depth of her courage, the strength of her resilience, or the joy of performing purely for the love of music. The fall had been necessary to rise higher than she ever imagined. In the end, she realized that triumph was not a destination, but a journey. It was not a single performance, but a series of choices. To face fear, to practice relentlessly, to embrace vulnerability, and to persist in the pursuit of passion. Every note played, every moment of doubt overcome. Every connection made through music was part of that triumph. And as she sat quietly one evening at her piano, playing softly for herself, she felt complete. She had reclaimed her voice, her confidence, and her love for music. She knew that challenges would continue to come, but she also knew that she had the inner strength to meet them. The stage was no longer a place of fear, but a place of empowerment, and she was ready to embrace it fully. Forever changed by the journey that began with humiliation and ended in triumph. After her triumphant return, life seemed to open up in unexpected ways. The confidence she had reclaimed began to spill over into other areas of her life. She approached friends and family with renewed openness, started exploring new opportunities, and allowed herself to dream beyond the boundaries she had once accepted. The stage had not only taught her courage, but had reshaped her view of possibility. She started to experiment with new pieces, exploring styles and compositions she had never attempted before. Each new piece was a challenge, not just technically, but emotionally. She pushed herself to interpret music in ways that were authentic, daring, and personal. The piano became more than an instrument. It became a mirror to her growth, a reflection of the person she was becoming. Her practice sessions, once a source of stress and fear, became exercises in joy and discovery. She allowed herself to make mistakes again, understanding that each imperfection held lessons. Where she had once feared judgment, she now embraced experimentation. The fear that had once loomed over every note was replaced by curiosity and excitement. Each attempt, whether successful or flawed, reinforced her resilience. Opportunities started to appear unexpectedly. She was invited to perform in community events, school programs, and local concerts. These were smaller stages, yes, but they allowed her to practice performing without overwhelming pressure. Each performance was a rehearsal for herself, a chance to test her skills and grow more comfortable with the vulnerability of being watched. The applause that once terrified her now felt like acknowledgement of her journey, rather than validation of her worth. She also began teaching younger students. Sharing her knowledge and experience became a new source of fulfillment. She guided them not only in technique, but in the emotional understanding of music. She emphasized the importance of persistence, the inevitability of mistakes, and the power of resilience. Teaching gave her a perspective she had not anticipated, reminded her of her own journey, and allowed her to see the impact of overcoming fear on others. Her relationships deepened as well. Friends and family noticed a change not just in her music, but in her personality. She listened more patiently, spoke with more confidence, and offered encouragement with authenticity. The inner strength she had developed translated into interactions outside of music. She realized that triumph was not confined to the stage. It shaped the way she approached life, despite her growing confidence. She did not forget the humiliation that had once nearly broken her. She reflected on it with honesty, recognizing it as a critical turning point rather than a failure. That experience had forced her to confront fear and doubt, teaching her lessons she could not have learned otherwise. She accepted that humiliation and struggle were not signs of weakness, but opportunities to build character. One day, she was invited to perform in a regional event, larger than any she had attempted since her return. The thought was intimidating, but she approached it with preparation and calm determination. She spent weeks practicing, visualizing the performance, and reinforcing her inner confidence. This time, the goal was not perfection. It was authentic expression and connection with the audience. When the day arrived, she walked onto the stage with composure. She could feel the excitement in the audience, but it did not control her. She was grounded, aware, and present. As she began playing, she noticed something remarkable. Her fingers moved freely. Her interpretation was fluid, and her emotion poured naturally into every note. The music was no longer just sound. It was an extension of her being, a narrative of her journey from fear to triumph. The audience responded warmly. They were captivated, not by flawless execution, but by the authenticity and passion of her performance. She realized that connection mattered more than perfection. That emotion and sincerity resonated more deeply than technical mastery alone. The applause that followed was generous and heartfelt. And for the first time, she allowed herself to fully absorb it, not as validation, but as recognition of her dedication and courage. After the performance, she reflected on the entire journey. She understood that the stages, the mistakes, the fear, and the triumphs had all been part of her personal evolution. Each experience had contributed to her growth, shaping her into someone stronger, more resilient, and more self-aware. The lessons from the stage extended far beyond music. They applied to life itself, teaching her perseverance, patience, and self-compassion. Her newfound confidence inspired her to explore other areas of interest. She took on new projects, joined community initiatives, and even tried activities she had once avoided out of fear. The growth she had cultivated through music had created a foundation of courage that allowed her to embrace life more fully. She understood that fear would never disappear completely, but she now had the tools to confront it and transform it into energy for growth. She continued to play music, not just as a performer, but as a storyteller. Each piece became a reflection of her experiences, emotions, and resilience. She experimented with composing her own music, creating melodies that expressed her journey in ways words could not capture. This creative process deepened her connection to music and to herself, solidifying the sense of empowerment she had worked so hard to reclaim. Through all these experiences, she became a quiet source of inspiration for others. Those who had seen her struggle or known her story recognized the strength and authenticity she now carried. She shared her journey openly when asked, not boasting but offering encouragement. Her story demonstrated that setbacks could be transformed into triumphs, that courage could be cultivated, and that resilience was a skill anyone could develop. Over time, she no longer measured success by applause or recognition. She measured it by growth, authenticity, and fulfillment. She understood that the journey itself, with all its challenges and triumphs, was more meaningful than any single moment of achievement. This perspective allowed her to live with a sense of freedom, joy, and purpose that had once felt unattainable. The lessons she learned on stage stayed with her forever. She remembered the fear, the failure, and the humiliation. But she also remembered the persistence, the courage, and the eventual triumph. These memories became a foundation a reminder that no setback was permanent, no mistake was final, and no fear was insurmountable. She carried these lessons into every aspect of her life, creating a life defined not by avoidance of fear, but by the courage to face it. And so, she continued to play, to teach, to create, and to live fully. Each day was an opportunity to grow, to explore, and to embrace the challenges that came her way. The piano remained her companion, her mirror, and her voice, guiding her through every triumph and every trial. Her journey had begun with humiliation, but it had led to empowerment, and it would continue to shape her life in ways she could only imagine.